Hi,
Yeah, you do.
I'm Mark Baer. Welcome back to the Your Town television program. My guest is poet Alan Soldofsky. Let me hold up his new book, In the Buddha Factory. So, welcome.
Thank you.
I just want to say, at the museum last week, we had a reading of Alan Soldofsky, Meredith Striker, and Joseph Stroud from Santa Cruz, and it was a really fabulous afternoon.
They're strong poets, and it was a real honor to read with them.
So I think the best thing before we talk about poetry, before we talk about where we are, well, let's talk a little bit about you, and then we'll jump right in.
Well, I am the Director of Creative Writing at San Jose State University, where I coordinate the Masters in Fine Arts in Creative Writing degree program. And of course, I've been writing poetry for a great deal of time. I started as a youngster when I was a student at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, where I got to join the Iowa Writers Workshop and was one of the youngest people to come out of that program with an MFA. I was just barely 22 when I finished, which meant that I had to figure out what to do with the rest of my life.
Before we talk about poetry, let's read some poetry.
Okay. I'll read a poem called Present, which is the title of the first section of In the Buddha Factory. And as you'll know from hearing this poem, it's a love poem. Present. Here in the blue sheen of the present, vanishing even as it arrives, I want to give you something, a present, although it is worth less than the string of pearls I can't afford to buy. It is only this arrangement of words with which I hope you will adorn yourself. My description of you, beauty so practiced, a rendition of Helen's colors chosen to allure. The first time I saw you, I couldn't help but keep the contours of your countenance in my mind, the way a live oak keeps its leaves. It cannot exist without its canopy. You prefer the slick hardware of a tropical breeze that makes each part of you tremble. Let my gift be that well designed, to be indispensable as the sky, something you would keep that may not seem important, but that will, in the rondure of the night, while you sleep, remind you that love is here, even if it needs from time to time to be repaired, that it's ubiquitous as water, spraying from the nozzle when you shower, that continually runs down the drain, only to be replenished.
Thank you. So when you started over the years, who were the poets that you read? Who were your guys?
Girls? When I was a youngster, I was sort of really into popular music, so I have to say the lyrics of Bob Dylan kind of really got me started, because I wanted to be a musician, and I tried to be a folk singer, and I tried to play in a rock band. It never worked out very well for me. So somebody suggested that maybe I should write down some of my own words, which I actually was doing. And I was really influenced as a young writer by poets that sort of were, this was the 60s, so that has sort of a psychedelic edge to them. I think of the poet James Tate. But I was also a student of a wonderful poet who lives now in Santa Cruz, Robert Sward, and he was a big influence on me for his wit and humor and the surprise and energy of his poems. And I was also a student of another poet named John Anderson, who's deceased now. He taught for a long time at the University of Arizona, who should be better known. And John's poems are discursive, that is, he thinks aloud, and sometimes his work harkens back to the great romantics of the British 17th and 18th century, Wordsworth and Coleridge in particular.
We talked about the other day, we talked about Gary Snyder.
Gary Snyder, I imitated Gary Snyder. I tried to do his poems where you leave out as many soft syllables as possible. He was using a technique called riprap. So I tried to leave out all the uhs and thus. That's hard to do. and I was really influenced by a poet named William Merwin, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner and I think twice. And his work is remarkable in that he recently, and certainly for the decades when I first became his fan, he never used punctuation. But you could tell where the pauses were because the lines were so sinuous and so well etched.
Well, growing up as a kid, because I was around Naropa at the time, so Merwin was the first kind of rock and roll super groupie. He was kind of he was a good-looking guy.
Yes,
but he'd always have two women with him that would be a foot taller than him.
Yeah.
And he always had this entourage, and he was like the first kind of superstar.
He was
poet.
definitely a superstar, and he during the '60s he used to barnstorm. He used to get involved in political campaigns against the American involvement in the Vietnam War, and poetry was very much part of that protest. So that there'd be big readings that we'd attend on our campus at the University of Iowa with Merwin and Robert Bly and Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Robert Creeley, and even John Berryman came to one of them. It was a remarkable event. That's when you would expect to see at a major poetry reading a couple of thousand people in the audience.
So I guess we should send some love out to Lou Reed, and from Lou Reed go to Delmore Schwartz.
Right.
Who was another poet of the day that was really
Delmore Schwartz was a person that sort of occupies this sort of interesting niche in between the First and Second World Wars and his mature poetry. There's a book called, actually a collection of kind of prose poems called In Dreams Begin Responsibilities. And he was an influence on other poets, Robert Lowell. A man who was a kind of sad and tragic figure himself, but a catalyst for a great deal of American poetry.
I've been looking a lot at the images, turn of the century images, and that's a whole nother.
Well, there's a lot of that, and in the Buddha Factory comes out of a trip that I got to take to Zhejiang province in China. And during that trip, I was carrying a couple of volumes with me of English language translations of Tang Dynasty and other earlier dynasties, anthologies of Chinese poetry.
And that's what Ezra Pound was looking at.
And that's what Ezra Pound was looking at. So the images are really coming out of Chinese poetry, and I never in my life would have thought that I would actually get to set foot not only in China and spend about a month's time there, but to actually get to tour a number of the sites that these great poets wrote about that I got to see with my own eyes.
So let's tell people about the actual Buddha Factory, because that's kind of really...
Yeah,
let me hold this book up while we're doing that.
I had the opportunity to, as part of this long sojourn in Zhejiang province, near the south of Shanghai, near the East China Sea. I got to go to a number of places, see a number of museums and historical sites, as well as see a number of factories and other kinds of activities that my hosts wanted me to be impressed by, and I certainly was. But one of the things we got to see near the town of Tiantai City on the way up to Mount Tiantai was a Buddha factory, a place that makes Buddha statues. And they had a showroom with 500...
Big Buddha statues.
There was one workshop in the back of the property that was about the size of an airplane hangar. And they were making a 48-meter tall Buddha statue for a temple in LA. And they took us into that space and toured us around, showed us how the men working on the scaffolds would carve the different parts of the statue, and showed us how they were going to cover it with some kind of ceramic material and then lacquer it.
And these aren't Buddhists.
I asked them if they were believers, and the factory manager said his father was, but that it was good business. And then later, the tour actually went up to the very ancient and venerable monastery at the top of Mount Tiantai. And this is where Zen Buddhism came from the Tiantai sect in Chinese Buddhism. And the monks there were very hospitable, showed us all around, took me to a space just above the monastery at the very summit of the mountain where there were some caves. And they said that the famous poet Han Shan, who Gary Snyder had translated, a poet who was not then in the canon of Chinese poetry, he was kind of a primitive renegade, a Chinese beatnik, if you will. And he was living at the monks' for the monks' hospitality, who were making sure that he had enough to eat. And there were poems in Chinese characters carved on the rocks. And they told me that Han Shan did that.
Oh, wow. So anyway, I want to make sure that people know where to get your book.
Okay.
I'm sure Amazon.
Amazon, and I could certainly say your independent bookstore. Tell them about it. It's from Truman State University Press. And if it's not on the shelf, ask your store to order it. Of course, Barnes & Noble is a likely place to find a copy or two. And in Santa Cruz, maybe Capitola Books or Bookshop Santa Cruz. But I would say even if you can't find it on the shelf in the store, you can go to the Truman State University website. You can Google that, and you can go right to a website where you can order a copy of the book. You can also find a copy of a video there.
Let's talk about the video.
Yes. I happen to be fortunate enough to work with a videographer named Bruce Smith, and I asked Bruce if he would be willing to collaborate on a book trailer that my press wanted to do. And he asked me for some ideas, and we went into a studio like this, and he recorded me reading the title poem in the Buddha Factory. And then he was able to find some remarkable images and some music and created a montage behind the reading of the poem. And it's about a 5-minute video. It's really terrific.
Okay, I think we have enough time. They haven't told me to stop yet. Let's have another piece.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read a piece that sort of anticipates winter. But you know, around here, winter has a different feel to it. And this is called Early December. What lies the sun tells. A few leaves stripped of color, parenthesis of rust on the hinges of the car door. A cricket singing beneath the clump of verbena beside the porch. High cirrus lit by something that has fallen. The edge of a storm front coming, a change in the smell of the air, a quiver in the wind. The house quiet except for the gnawing in the attic, the sound of a sound that barely holds the weight of being heard, a remnant that ripples down the hallway into the room where you slept, your books still dozing on the shelves, waiting for you, the darkness smooth as licorice, the only light in the house, the one in the closet, left on since morning.
Well, fabulous. So,
thank you.
Go to Amazon, get your book. So anyway, the last thing, because we're going to hear music here in a second, you got friended by Steven Soderbergh. How about that?
That was a strange thing. I wasn't expecting it. He apparently follows some poets, and he's interested in making a movie about another poet who's a mutual friend of mine I think in real life. I probably can't go into, I don't want to give away too many of Steven Soderbergh's secrets, but yeah, all kinds of people are interested in poetry.
Yeah, poets matter.
Yeah, poets matter. That's true. Robert Redford is a friend of Gary Snyder's, and he has lots of poems by Yeats that Redford knows by heart. And he and Snyder go camping in the Yosemite, and they take long hikes, and they recite poetry to each other. That's pretty cool.
And then I guess in just the last few seconds, I want to have a shout out to Meredith Striker, because what a fabulous poet that we have living here.
Yes, and she's a remarkable poet, sort of an experimentalist. She's also a tremendous visual artist, and she combines, when she performs, elements from her visual art and from her linguistic art. It's a full immersion environment to go into one of Meredith's poems.
Yeah, she lives here, so.
It's a great poetry community here in the Monterey Bay, and if folks are interested, they should be keeping up with the readings that are going to be happening all over the area.
Okay, Alan Soldofsky, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Baer. You've been watching the Your Town television program. I'm your host every third Tuesday of the month. See you then.